By many accounts, James Franklin is going to be the next head coach of the Virginia Tech Hokies. And that was, as this is being recorded, that it was finalized. The deal was being finalized. Obviously, there are still ways that this could fall apart. Let's just operate under the idea that it is 100% slam dunk fact that James Franklin is the next head coach of the Hokies. It's a slam dunk hire for Virginia Tech. Make no mistake about it. And I know that it feels weird and wrong to make that stance and statement about a coach who got fired earlier this season. But I think that it's true. James Franklin has won everywhere he has been. Won at Vanderbilt. Won at Penn State. Didn't win apparently enough at Penn State. But when the pressure is off for James Franklin to succeed at the level of potentially unrealistic expectations, that could be a different topic for a different day about whether Penn State's expectations were in line with reality. I think that they both might have been and might not have been because of the way that James Franklin recruited as the head coach at Penn State. And that's the biggest reason for why Virginia Tech got a slam dunk hire by getting James Franklin to sign on the dotted line. Because James Franklin is undeniably a very good recruiter. Penn State had as much talent consistently as virtually anybody else outside of the Ohio State, LSU, Alabama, Texas group that consistently dominated the first round of the NFL draft. Because Penn State had plenty of first-round draft picks under James Franklin. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's going to continue for Virginia Tech, because it's not just you magically keep your abilities to get five-star recruits to a place that they've never really come to. And there have been good recruits. There have been great players to come through Virginia Tech. Don't get me wrong. But it's a little different recruiting Penn State than it is Virginia Tech. But for James Franklin and for Virginia Tech, he's had success recruiting Virginia and the Tidewater region and Tennessee and North Carolina and Pennsylvania. That region of the country, he's done a really good job recruiting in over the course of his tenure. And he's going to an area that he's somewhat familiar with. And I think it's going to have a lot of success, because there are two things that I think set James Franklin up for success at Virginia Tech. The first is that this is true of NFL coaches. I haven't seen anybody dive into the data of college coaches, but I think that it probably correlates. In the NFL, coaches who are a head coach for a second time, whether they have resigned, been fired, whatever, when they have left one head coaching job and later on got another job, they almost universally had a higher winning percentage the second time around. Now, there's a lot of causation, correlation that you can deduce from that. But logic would tell you that once you've done something once, doing it a second time and having even just a few weeks to recalibrate and reassess, take a step back, look at things from that 30,000-foot view, that would undeniably be beneficial to your future success. That having that chance to look at it and go, okay, this is what I got right, this is what I got wrong. Having the chance to take that step back and reevaluate everything that you do is beneficial. So in that, having that knowledge, knowing that, and obviously this isn't the second time James Franklin has been a head coach. It kind of is, because he went from Vanderbilt to Penn State, right? Like that you could count as one head coaching tenure, and now has been off the job, even for just a couple of weeks, and now back on the job, there is a difference in that than if he had been the head coach at Penn State, got fired the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and then jumped to Blacksburg. So this is his third head coaching job, but for sake of this argument, it's the second time he has been a head coach. It's the second go-around for James Franklin. And when you know that the people in that situation almost universally have a higher winning percentage, and this is in a controlled environment in the NFL where, there are 32 teams, 32 franchises where the schedules are relatively balanced, right? It's not as if you're saying James Franklin had win percentage X at Penn State and then went to Troy and had a different win percentage. These are, for lack of a better term, almost apples to apples. It's probably like oranges to tangerines instead of apples to bananas, because going from Penn State to Virginia Tech is still the Power 4 level. There's obviously differences in investment, booster support, recruiting ground, etc. But for sake of the argument, it's oranges to tangerines. Knowing that conceivably the win percentage is going to go up should be a huge shot in the arm to Virginia Tech. They should feel jacked, just over the moon excited that somebody who consistently won who had double-digit win totals consistently at Penn State is now becoming your head coach. Should get that fan base incredibly excited because, and I've made this statement or argument before, that in these situations, you often want what you didn't have before. Where Brent Pry is not necessarily the most charismatic, feels like a right word, charismatic guy in the history of the planet. He doesn't exude personality and charm and things like that. When James Franklin does. James Franklin is a charismatic dude. I think if you look through the coaches who got fired mid-season and the recruits that stayed committed to those programs, I think like LSU has had a player decommit from their recruiting class. Florida has had none. And I might have those numbers backwards. Penn State has had 17. 17 kids from their recruiting class had said, well, if James Franklin, and obviously this is an overarching generalization, but if James Franklin isn't going to be there, I don't want to be there. And so when you take the opposite of what you had, was kind of a bland, and this is not being necessarily nice to Brent Pry, but you had kind of a bland guy who didn't instill a lot of excitement and didn't make anybody feel overjoyed that he was their coach. You're now in a situation where a guy with a ton of personality, a ton of charm, a ton of charisma is coming to that program, and there should be a lot of excitement. The second portion of that I think goes hand in glove with this is that the ACC is 100% up for the taking, because it certainly appears as if Miami has had their opportunities to run that thing, and they have not capitalized on it yet. Clemson is on the downturn. Florida State in the same boat. Georgia Tech is having a really good year. I'm interested to see what Brent Key can do when Haynes King, just an absolute dog at quarterback, isn't the guy that they have to rely on. I think Syracuse is going to be a player under Fran Brown. But there is no 10,000-pound gorilla in the ACC. It just doesn't exist. And that should be insanely interesting and exciting to Virginia Tech fans. And I think it's insanely enticing to James Franklin because it's the same thing. Virginia Tech wanted the opposite of what they just had, right? They had a bland coach, and they want the opposite. They want somebody who's going to come in, win the press conference, say the right things, shake hands, kiss babies, raise funds, make them a player in the ACC. On the flip side of that, James Franklin wants the opposite of what he had too. Because you look at the last two national champions in college football, they're Michigan and Ohio State. Michigan and Ohio State. Teams that Penn State, before this year and next year, had to play every year. You had to play the two strongest teams every year that won the national championship the last 2 years in your league. That there was this insanely powerful force that you were always going to have to try to defeat. By James Franklin taking that job at Virginia Tech, that no longer exists. That is not the situation that he's walking into in the ACC. He doesn't have to spend day one of his job going, holy hell, how are we going to build a roster, build a program that is going to compete with Team XYZ to compete for the conference crown? He doesn't have to do that because that team doesn't exist. And when that team doesn't exist, I think you should feel, if you're a Virginia Tech fan, kind of right away that everybody else in the conference now says, crap. Because they thought it was going to be Miami, and Mario Cristobal hasn't done that yet. Thought it was going to be Florida State under Mike Norvell. For a long time, it was Clemson. I don't think it's that. I think it's a foregone conclusion that it's not Bill Belichick at North Carolina. Bill O'Brien might someday get Boston College humming. As I said, I think Fran Brown at Syracuse is going to do a really nice job, and Georgia Tech is certainly the best team, I think, in the conference this year. But if that's the scenario, that's the situation that James Franklin walks into right now, I think he's got to feel pretty good about that. I think he's got to think like, I can come in here and build a winner almost immediately. And if he can do that, his stock's only going to rise because there's already, even in the immediate aftermath of his firing, I think there were a lot of people like, yeah, what could they do? And then once the temperature gets lowered a little bit, you start to reassess yourself and go, did they maybe jump the gun on that just a little bit? Did they might have fired him a little too quick. So you go to a place where I think you have an opportunity to be a winner pretty quickly. Coupled with the fact that you're probably motivated to shove it up Penn State's rear end and rub their face in it. I think that's a recipe for James Franklin to Virginia Tech to be kind of a perfect fit for both sides. And when things fit that well, I think good things happen. I'm not here to tell you that I think Virginia Tech is going to magically become a national championship caliber program under James Franklin. I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that they're going to be winning 11 and 12 games every year and getting buys in the college football playoff. But I wouldn't be shocked if we are sitting here in this very same spot in mid-November 2027, 2028, talking about Virginia Tech is in the running for the college football playoff, is in the running to win the ACC. I don't think that's in a far-fetched situation for the Hokies to find themselves in the really not all that far future. With the way the transfer portal works, with the way and the relationships that James Franklin has in both high schools and college, I think he has the opportunity to build a great staff, turn that thing around really quickly, and it might not be in 2026, but in 2027, 2028. I don't think it's outlandish to think that Virginia Tech can be a player in the ACC going forward. Want to know your thoughts. Do you think this hire works? If you were Virginia Tech, would you have hired James Franklin? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read them. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. I appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you get all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you are listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll catch you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.